I had referred to the shirt before, so just giving you a little bit better look at it. Okay, I had made this shirt up 10 years ago, and I always wore it when I worked with dyslexic kids and adults. All right, we're on chapter 2. This should be the end of chapter 2, which was called Visual Dyslexia in the Classroom. The book is by Dale Jordan. This is the second edition, 1977. We're on page 26, and like I said, this should finish chapter 2. Errors in copying. An especially difficult task for dyslexics is copying information from the chalkboard or from a projection screen. This involves conservation of form, also called vision to motor transfer. The child must see the forms clearly, hold them intact, conserve the form as he moves his focus to the writing space. He has to hold them intact. Oh, I've read that already. Translate what he saw into specific motor movements, which are the fine motor control skills he needs. Space it properly on the writing paper, which is figure to ground control, and end up with a legible facsimile of what was on the chalkboard or in the text from which he was copying. Busy teachers often forget what a complex task copying really is. It is a monumental task for visual dyslexics who do not conserve form without enormous concentration and effort. The advent of visual aids has increased the pressure on many students to take notes while the teacher lectures with an overhead projector or a screen nowadays. The basic problems with symbol confusion handicap a visual dyslexic in such a setting. His slow work rate, confusion with symbols, and frustration with keeping items in correct sequence combine to make copying from a distance a hazardous undertaking. The teacher can rather easily identify which of her pupils is handicapped by far point copying. A neatly lettered or handwritten paragraph can be put on the chalkboard or large chart. Each pupil is asked to copy the paragraph from across the room. As the children are at work copying, the teacher watches for these tendencies. Number 1, losing his or her place on the chart. Number 2, erasing frequently. Number 3, overprinting to correct mistakes on the paper. Number 4, misspelling on the paper. Number 5, failing to observe capital letters. Number 6, failing to observe punctuation cues. Number 7, failing to space properly on paper. Number 8, reversing letters. Number 9, reversing whole words. And number 10, working unusually slowly. These flaws in performance can also be caused by certain defects of vision, and you'd have to look into chapter 8 for that. The teacher must be careful not to mistake dyslexic confusion of sequence with specific vision defects, okay? So if a kid cannot copy from across the room, it very well could be a real vision problem, and that's why it's so important to have their vision checked. When anything is suspected, all right, that has to be eliminated. And when the results come back and the child has perfect vision or minor problems, you know that it is not a vision problem. It's a vision perception problem. Okay, their eyes are seeing, but it's not getting to the brain properly. Let's see. Okay. The following example of copying errors illustrates the dyslexic difficulty with far point copying. The story is from the JWST, the Jordan Written Screening Test for Specific Reading Disabilities, okay, which is in the appendix, again in the book, Makes the book valuable if you're, really looking to get the full value of this information. Okay, but this is a little paragraph, okay, that the kids are supposed to write. All right, and it's a little tricky, okay. Bob and Dan is the name of the story. And the teacher would read this to them. Bob and Dan saw Sam Watts on the dock. The three men stopped. See the big ship? Asked Sam. Sure did, Dan and Bob said. Must be a mile long. Bob and Dan saw Sam was in a hurry. Gotta run, Sam said. See you. Sure, said Bob and Dan. See you soon, Sam. Okay, again, here's the example of what that ends up coming out after the student writes it down. Of course, you can't see it unless you have the book. Errors in spelling. There is a unique pattern of spelling error which distinguishes visual dyslexia from auditory dyslexia. Because the primary disability is not being able to handle items in sequence, the visual dyslexic cannot recall a clear mental image of whole word forms. Usually, the student is able to identify most of the sound units which make up specific words, but the letters will be in scrambled order when he writes the word. The visual dyslexic can identify the sound elements in common words. His problem is not being able to record them in correct sequence. The following errors illustrate visual dyslexia in spelling from memory. The teacher must keep in mind that this pattern may also be found in other forms of learning disability. So, in Mike's mind, he's thinking of the word road, R-O-D-E, and his written response is R-O-E-D. In Mike's mind, he's thinking of the word ate, A-T-E, and he writes A-E-T. Mike's thinking the word goes, G-O-E-S, and he writes G-O-S-E. The word heaven becomes H-A-V-E-E-N, Havian. The word marriage, M-A-R-R-I-A-G-E, becomes marriage, M-I-R-A-R-A-G-E. Okay, now this is a checklist of visual dyslexia symptoms. Okay, if you actually want to do it, again, you might want the book so that you can make this test up and be able to actually mark off what you're seeing. But I'll go through it really quickly. Okay, so the checklist of visual dyslexia symptoms. Through extensive work with children and classroom teachers, the author, Dale Jordan, has devised the following informal checklist for identifying visual dyslexia. It is important that teachers withhold judgment until a definite syndrome of dyslexic symptoms has been identified in a pupil's behavior. If a significant cluster of perceptual errors appears as the teacher studies a child's behavior, then it is generally safe to conclude that visual dyslexia exists in the pupil's perceptual process. However, the checklists in Chapter 8 must also be considered so that certain other disabilities are not mistaken for dyslexia. So even though a child may show a number of these, it doesn't definitely mean it's visual dyslexia. It has to be checked against other issues. So again, the book is valuable. All right, so these are what you would look for. Okay, this is part of the checklist. Okay, under confusion with sequence. All right, you would see if the child has poor concept of time, poor concept of chronological order of events, cannot give day, month, and year of birth, cannot repeat the months of the year, cannot repeat the days of the week, cannot remember multiplication tables. Okay, Under difficulty with following directions. Cannot remember daily routines at home. Cannot follow the teacher's directions in the classroom. Cannot comprehend instructions when given to a group. And needs individual explanations. And the last one would be needs constant reminding of what to do next. The next section is faulty oral language, oral meaning speaking. Is fluent at telling stories or giving oral reports. Now that's a positive thing, okay? The child may be very good at telling stories or giving something orally. And that's a giveaway, because if they can't do it on paper or when they're reading, then it's pretty much a giveaway. The child can discuss information from non-reading sources, so they're really good, at telling stories or describing experiences. And this one's a negative. The child has difficulty with correct sequence of events, so they can tell the story but get it all mixed up. The next section is faulty reading comprehension. The child fails to identify main ideas. The child fails to tell story events out of sequence. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not. The child tells story events out of sequence. The child loses meaning of sentences or paragraphs before reaching the end. The child fails to draw inferences from what has been read. And the child has difficulty recalling details when answering comprehensive questions. Okay. The next section is slow work rate. The child seldom finishes timed exercises. The child easily frustrated when pressured for speed. The child's work pace is considerably slower than the classmates. The child can do satisfactory work if given ample time and help. And the child will not use full time allowance on timed tests. Instead, they guess and they mark items at random. It's out of frustration. The next section is difficulty with the alphabet. The child does not know the alphabet in correct sequence. The child omits certain letters from the alphabetic sequence. The child mixes capital and lowercase letters. That's a really good indicator. The child mixes manuscript and cursive styles. The child confuses similar letters. The child makes certain letters backward and upside down. The child sings the alphabet song or repeats rhyme to check the sequence. And the child is not able to synchronize voice, finger, and eyes while checking his or her work. The next section is confusion with symbols. He or she demonstrates poor perception when symbols are traced on the back. Again, that goes back to feeling the letter on their back and being able to tell you what you traced. Let's see. The child perceives symbols upside down. The child perceives symbols backwards. The child distorts shapes or symbols. The child rotates positions of the symbols. The child writes with a capital B and D all the time, trying to avoid that letter confusion of the lowercase B and D and the P and the Q. The child confuses certain symbols in reading, writing, and arithmetic. The child cannot conserve form in copy work. Okay, and again, there's a checklist for the letters that they have particular problems with. So B, D, P, and Q, easily mixed up. H and Y, again. R and N. R, C, and S. F and T. The letter 3 and the the number 3 and the capital E. Lowercase h and n. Lowercase m and w. Lowercase l and I. Lowercase n and u. Uppercase N and the uppercase Z. The numbers 6 and 9. And the mathematical signs of plus and times, and a comma. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not included. Plus and times, those are easily confused. And the negative and the division sign with the line and the dots above it and below. Errors in oral reading. Okay, this is if the child is asked to stand up and read something. Very embarrassing. The child reverses whole words. The child reverses beginning letters. The child transposes L and R in consonant blends. The child substitutes similar letters or words. He transposes letters inside of words. He fails to perceive minimal cues in words. Fails to perceive minimal cues in punctuation. Omits the endings. Telescopes, which means he leaves out letters or syllables. Perseverates, which means adds extra letters or syllables. Almost done. Okay, we're at the end. Errors in spelling. Transposes silent letters within words. Does not recall correct order of letters and misplaces the silent E. Errors in arithmetic. Dyscalculia. Errors in arithmetic. Reverses processes while computing. Carries or borrows the wrong digit. And cannot organize facts in story problems. And finally, errors in copying. That's the dog. You've got to ignore her. Loses place on the board, which is far-point copying. Misspells on paper. Fails to observe capital letters. Fails to observe punctuation cues. Fails to space properly. Erases frequently. Overprints to correct mistakes. Reverses letters. Reverses whole words. Telescopes. Perseverates. Works unusually slowly. And seeks to terminate to avoid copying tasks. I'm sorry about the dog. This is the end of the chapter. I just want you to see that Dr. Jordan lists many, many references at the ends of his chapters to other authors and other studies that have been done about these different things. Of course, this is back in the 70s. All right, so there have been other studies that have been done on these since then, but I'm not aware of studies that disprove this information. Okay, the next chapter is auditory dyslexia in the classroom. I believe I am going to skip that and go to dysgraphia because auditory dyslexia is what we're constantly referring to in our today's dyslexic experts. This is what they say dyslexia is. So they're constantly talking about this phonemic awareness, okay? And that's basically what Dr. Jordan is saying here. We've heard it a million times. It's the 12 to 24% of the kids that have visual dyslexia that have been ignored for 20 years. So I am going to I'm going to skip chapter 3 and go straight to chapter 4, which is dysgraphia. And that's another group of kids and adults who are ignored today. So the next reading will be chapter 4. Thank you.